The conference room door slammed shut behind me. Through the frosted glass, I could see my colleagues settling into chairs I'd occupied for countless strategy sessions. Now I stood in the hallway, clutching my presentation folder like a dismissed schoolchild. "We want bolder thinkers in the room," Vincent Ashford had said, his smirk cutting deeper than any knife. The CEO's words echoed as I watched him gesture to the very presentation I'd spent weeks perfecting. "My name is Claudia Mason. I'm 34 years old, and until that moment, I was Red Sea Enterprises Senior Strategy Director. For 8 years, I'd climbed every corporate rung with precision and dedication. My quarterly reports consistently exceeded targets. My market analyses had guided 7 successful product launches worth over $200 million. I thought I'd earned my seat at that table. I was catastrophically wrong. Let me take you back to when Vincent still seemed like the visionary leader I'd admired. 3 years ago, he'd personally recruited me after flying to Chicago specifically to meet me. "Claudia," he'd said over dinner at the Ritz-Carlton, "you're exactly the kind of visionary Red Sea needs. That Southeast Asia expansion strategy you developed increased client revenue by 43%. That's the strategic thinking that will drive our next growth phase." He'd offered me a 35% salary increase, stock options, and direct reporting relationship with guaranteed input on all strategic decisions. For 27 months, that promise held true. Vincent valued my insights, championed my initiatives, and publicly credited my work. Our Q2 and Q3 results broke company records, largely due to my market penetration strategy targeting small to medium enterprises. But corporate dynamics shift like fault lines, and sometimes you don't feel the earthquake until buildings collapse around you. Vincent's transformation began exactly 8 months ago. I can pinpoint the moment because I started keeping notes. The change coincided with Red Sea's IPO preparations when investment bankers began circling our company. Initially subtle, I attributed changes to natural IPO stress. Vincent started declining my meeting requests, claiming overwhelming investor presentations. He'd reschedule our weekly strategy sessions repeatedly until they vanished from both calendars. More concerning was reassigning my high-profile projects to newer team members without explanation. My European market expansion analysis? Transferred to Jake Sullivan, a recent MBA graduate. The competitive intelligence report? Handed to a junior analyst. When I questioned these decisions, Vincent's responses became evasive and condescending. "We need to develop junior talent," he'd say dismissively. "Fresh perspectives might reveal opportunities you've missed." The real warning signs appeared during monthly all-hands meetings. Vincent would present strategic insights that sounded familiar because they were sections lifted from my reports. He'd describe his innovative approach to client retention using phrases I recognized as my intellectual property. What made the theft insidious was how he undermined my credibility with subtle character assassinations. He'd interrupt my presentations with comments like, "That's interesting, Claudia, but I'm not sure clients are ready for such experimental approaches." The exclusion became systematic. Vincent scheduled critical meetings without informing me, then acted surprised when I inquired. "We covered that already," he'd say. "I'll have Melissa send you notes." Those notes never materialized. My frustration reached boiling point watching less experienced colleagues present my strategies. During one quarterly review, Jake Sullivan presented what he called his revolutionary client acquisition framework, lifted verbatim from my 8-month-old white paper. Jake received enthusiastic praise for innovative thinking. Board member Charlotte Fleming commented his approach represented exactly the forward-thinking leadership Red Sea needs. I sat stunned, recognizing my concepts and research methodology recycled without attribution. The pattern became unmistakable. My fintech competitor analysis became Jake's insights into disruptive forces. My client retention framework transformed into his breakthrough approach to customer lifecycle management. Vincent's most devastating blow came during our quarterly retreat in Santa Barbara. Before the entire senior team, he announced Jake's promotion to lead strategic analyst, essentially my responsibilities, with a $40,000 increase and stock options. "Jake brings fresh energy and innovative thinking," Vincent announced theatrically. His recent contributions demonstrate exactly the bold thinking that will drive continued success. That night, overlooking the Pacific, I finally acknowledged the terrifying reality: Vincent wasn't restructuring for efficiency. He was methodically orchestrating my professional destruction while positioning himself as Red Sea's strategic mastermind. Every innovative concept I'd shared confidentially, every breakthrough methodology developed through late nights, every market insight from our private brainstorming, all weaponized to elevate his reputation while erasing my contributions. This was personal, calculated, and deliberately destructive. So I investigated with systematic precision. I documented everything forensically. Every excluded meeting, reassigned project, and dismissive comment was cataloged with timestamps and witnesses. I created folders containing email threads, calendar screenshots, and presentation comparisons painting an irrefutable picture of Vincent's campaign. My investigation revealed Vincent had been stealing my strategies and presenting them to the board as his own. Those quarterly successes during investor calls? My analytical frameworks. The market approaches earning him industry recognition? My demographic research. The competitive intelligence helping Red Sea outmaneuver rivals? My months of analysis. But Vincent had also been poisoning my reputation with board members, describing me as difficult to work with and resistant to change. I discovered this through Patricia Winters, our CFO, who mentioned my recent shift toward conservative thinking during a chance coffee encounter. Conservative? I asked, confused. Patricia looked uncomfortable. Vincent mentioned you'd been pushing back against bold expansion ideas during executive meetings. This was opposite reality. I'd advocated aggressive expansion while Vincent urged caution. But Patricia's comment revealed how skillfully Vincent had been rewriting our dynamic. The smoking gun came from Vincent's executive assistant, Melissa Wright. Melissa approached me after hours on a rainy Thursday evening. "Claudia, I need to show you something," she whispered, glancing toward Vincent's office. "Meet me at the parking garage in 10 minutes. In the dimly lit garage, Melissa pulled out a tablet loaded with organized files. "I've been watching what Vincent's doing to you," she said quietly. "At first, I thought there were legitimate reasons, but I've realized he's systematically destroying your career while stealing your ideas." She showed me Vincent's private calendar from 8 months earlier. Multiple entries labeled Board Strategy Review VA only corresponded with when he'd started excluding me. He specifically instructed me to schedule these without department heads present, Melissa explained. Vincent said he needed to control the narrative and streamline decision-making without bureaucratic interference. She handed me a flash drive containing insurance files, Vincent's real calendar, private emails, recorded phone calls, and more shocking evidence. That night, reviewing every file with growing dread, I discovered Vincent's sophisticated disinformation campaign. Email chains showed him questioning my performance decline with board members who'd never expressed concerns. Phone transcripts revealed him describing my recommendations as disconnected from reality while presenting those same strategies as his insights during investor meetings. Most devastating were recordings of Vincent discussing restructuring the strategic leadership team. In one clear recording from a board dinner, "Claudia's become too comfortable, too set in her approaches. We need thinking that pushes boundaries, not maintains status quo. I've been developing innovative frameworks that will surprise you." Those innovative frameworks? Every single one was lifted from my private brainstorming sessions. The drive also contained financial documents showing Vincent positioning himself for significant equity increases tied to Red Sea's IPO, with compensation linked to being credited as architect of our strategic successes. By stealing my work, he was potentially securing millions at my expense. Time to flip the script and deploy every strategic skill I'd developed. I spent 10 days preparing my counterattack with methodical precision. This wasn't emotional revenge, this was strategic warfare fought with documentation and irrefutable facts. First, I compiled a comprehensive dossier including timeline analyses proving Vincent's intellectual property theft, with metadata showing original authorship dates. I created side-by-side comparisons of my frameworks versus Vincent's presentations, highlighting identical language and data points. Second, I reached out to 3 board members requesting private meetings to discuss urgent concerns about strategic leadership accountability. Eleanor Blackstone, the board chair, agreed to meet first. I also prepared contingency strategies if Vincent retaliated, documenting every interaction and consulting an employment attorney about legal options. 3 days before my Eleanor meeting, Vincent made a critical mistake. During our monthly client advisory meeting, he presented his revolutionary approach to market penetration built entirely on my 6-month-old research but embellished with unrealistic projections. After the meeting, I approached our largest client, Rebecca Torres, privately. "There might be disconnect between the presentation and our actual market analysis," I said carefully. Would you like to review the original research to ensure realistic expectations? Rebecca's interest was immediate. I provided my time-stamped original analysis, which revealed significant gaps between Vincent's promises and market realities. Rebecca's response was exactly what I'd hoped. Claudia, this analysis is substantially different from Vincent's presentation. I need to understand these discrepancies. Walking into Eleanor Blackstone's private office felt like entering a courtroom where I was simultaneously the prosecutor, key witness, and victim seeking justice. Eleanor's reputation preceded her. She'd built 2 companies from startup to IPO, survived 3 hostile takeover attempts, and had zero tolerance for corporate misconduct that could damage shareholder value or company reputation. Her corner office in the financial district reflected her no-nonsense approach: minimal decoration, functional furniture, and walls lined with industry awards that spoke to decades of strategic leadership success. Eleanor gestured for me to sit across from her massive mahogany desk while she reviewed my meeting request summary. Mrs. Blackstone, I began, sliding my meticulously organized folder across the polished desk surface. I need to bring something serious to your attention that could significantly impact Red Sea's strategic direction, legal standing, and upcoming IPO prospects. For the next 75 minutes, I walked her through Vincent's deception with the clinical precision of a forensic auditor presenting evidence to a federal prosecutor. Every stolen strategy was documented with original timestamps, metadata proving authorship, and side-by-side comparisons showing identical language and methodology. Every character assassination attempt was supported by recorded conversations and email trails that revealed the systematic nature of Vincent's campaign. Eleanor's expression shifted from initial skepticism to growing concern to barely contained outrage as the evidence mounted. She interrupted my presentation multiple times to ask pointed questions that demonstrated her grasp of the legal and financial implications. These are serious allegations, Claudia, she said finally, her voice tight with controlled anger. If proven true, Vincent's actions constitute multiple forms of corporate malfeasance, intellectual property theft, fraud in board presentations, potential securities violations given our IPO preparations, and breach of fiduciary duty to shareholders. They are true, I responded firmly. And there's additional evidence that makes the situation even more concerning. I played the audio recordings Melissa had captured of Vincent's private phone calls with board members. Eleanor listened in stunned silence as Vincent's voice filled her office, describing me as past her prime, lacking vision, and resistant to necessary changes while simultaneously detailing plans to phase out dead weight and bring in hungrier strategic talent. The recordings also captured Vincent taking explicit credit for strategic initiatives that predated his involvement by months. In one particularly damaging conversation with board member George Hamilton, Vincent described his breakthrough insights into competitive positioning using terminology and concepts I developed in reports that were timestamped before Vincent had even reviewed the underlying market research. But the most devastating evidence was Vincent's recorded conversation with potential investors from Goldman Sachs, where he positioned himself as the strategic architect behind Red Sea's recent success. I personally developed the frameworks that drove our 43% revenue increase this year, Vincent's voice stated clearly. My innovative approaches to market penetration and competitive analysis have consistently outperformed industry benchmarks. Eleanor's face had gone pale by the time the recordings ended. Vincent is essentially committing securities fraud by misrepresenting his contributions to potential investors, she said quietly. If these claims influence investment decisions or IPO valuations, we're looking at potential SEC violations and massive legal liability. I then presented the external validation from Rebecca Torres, our major client who had identified discrepancies between Vincent's promises and the underlying market research. Eleanor immediately grasped the implications. Vincent wasn't just stealing credit, he was making business commitments based on inflated interpretations of my research that could expose Red Sea to significant financial and reputational risks. Eleanor, I concluded, this isn't just about personal workplace conflicts or credit attribution. Vincent's actions are creating legal vulnerabilities, damaging client relationships, and potentially jeopardizing our IPO prospects. As a board member, you need to understand the full scope of what's happening before it escalates further. Eleanor closed the folder containing my evidence and looked directly into my eyes. Claudia, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention through proper channels rather than escalating externally. Your documentation is thorough and concerning. I'm calling an emergency executive committee meeting for tomorrow afternoon to discuss these allegations with other board members. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I want you to understand that if these accusations are substantiated, the consequences for Vincent will be severe and immediate. We cannot tolerate leadership behavior that exposes Red Sea to legal liability or damages our corporate integrity. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Vincent's name appeared on the caller ID. "What did you tell Eleanor?" he demanded, slamming his palms on my desk. "She's calling emergency board meetings, asking questions about strategic authorship, demanding to review presentation archives." I looked up calmly from my computer. "I told her the truth, Vincent. Something you seem to have forgotten how to do." "You can't prove anything," he snarled, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward him. "Actually, I can prove everything." The display showed a detailed timeline of his theft, complete with metadata from our internal systems proving I'd created every strategy he'd claimed as his own. Vincent's face went pale. "Eleanor called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning," I continued. "Seems they want to discuss leadership accountability and strategic integrity. You're the main topic of discussion." The emergency board meeting convened at 2 p.m. sharp in Red Sea's executive conference room on the 45th floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown skyline stretched endlessly, but inside the room, tension was suffocating. Eleanor sat at the head of the polished conference table, flanked by board members George Hamilton, Patricia Chan, and Michael Brooks. Vincent sat opposite them, surrounded by boxes of printed materials, USB drives, and legal pads covered in frantic handwriting. I occupied a chair at the side table, my own organized evidence folder positioned strategically in front of me. "This emergency session addresses serious allegations regarding intellectual property integrity and leadership conduct," Eleanor began formally. "Vincent, you've had 3 hours to review the accusations and gather supporting documentation. Please present your response to the board." Vincent cleared his throat nervously, shuffling through papers with trembling hands. "The allegations against me represent a fundamental misunderstanding of collaborative strategic development processes. In dynamic business environments, ideas evolve through team input and iterative refinement. What Claudia characterizes as theft is actually normal executive synthesis of departmental insights." George Hamilton leaned forward skeptically. "Vincent, we're not discussing general collaboration. We're examining specific instances where strategic frameworks appear in board presentations attributed to you, but documentary evidence suggests original development by Ms. Mason months before your presentations. Strategic thinking often leads different people to similar conclusions," Vincent responded weakly. "Convergent innovation is common in competitive industries." Eleanor opened my evidence folder and pulled out side-by-side presentation comparisons. "Vincent, explain how convergent innovation accounts for identical language, identical data sets, and identical implementation timelines appearing in your presentations months after Ms. Mason's documented development." The room fell silent as Vincent stared at the damning comparisons. His usual eloquence had evaporated, replaced by stammering attempts at explanation. Patricia Chan spoke next, her voice cutting through the tension. "We've also reviewed audio recordings of your conversations with board members and external investors. These recordings contain explicit statements where you claim personal credit for strategic initiatives that predate your involvement. Can you explain these discrepancies?" Eleanor activated a conference room speaker and played the most damaging recording: Vincent's conversation with Goldman Sachs investors, where he positioned himself as Red Sea's strategic architect. His own voice filled the room with unmistakable clarity. "I personally developed the frameworks driving our 43% revenue increase. My innovative approaches consistently outperform industry benchmarks." Vincent's face went ashen as his recorded voice continued detailing his strategic insights using terminology and concepts lifted directly from my private reports. "The recordings speak for themselves," Eleanor said coldly. "You explicitly claimed personal credit for work that documentary evidence proves was developed by Ms. Mason. This isn't collaboration or convergent thinking, this is deliberate misrepresentation to investors and board members." Michael Brooks consulted his notes before speaking. "Vincent, we've also discovered concerning discrepancies between strategic commitments you made to major clients and the underlying research capabilities. Ms. Mason's original analysis indicates your client commitments exceed realistic implementation parameters. This creates significant liability exposure for Red Sea." "I was being optimistic about our capabilities," Vincent said desperately. "Aggressive growth projections are necessary to capture market opportunities. Optimistic projections based on research you didn't conduct and methodologies you didn't develop, Patricia responded sharply. You made financial commitments to clients using strategic frameworks you had no role in creating. That's not optimism, that's fraudulent representation of company capabilities. Eleanor placed the audio recordings back in the evidence folder. Vincent, your actions constitute multiple serious violations: intellectual property theft from a senior executive, securities fraud through misrepresentation to potential investors, breach of fiduciary duty to shareholders, and creation of legal liability through unrealistic client commitments. The board members exchanged glances before Eleanor continued with formal gravity. We've reached a unanimous preliminary decision, but we want to hear any final statements you'd like to make in your defense. Vincent sat in defeated silence for nearly a minute before speaking quietly. I became obsessed with positioning Red Sea for IPO success and securing my own financial future. The pressure to demonstrate strategic leadership clouded my judgment. I convinced myself that adapting Claudia's work was acceptable executive synthesis rather than theft. I was wrong. His admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Eleanor nodded grimly. Vincent Ashford, the board votes unanimously to terminate your employment immediately for cause. Security will escort you from the building within the hour. All equity compensation is forfeited. We're also recommending legal counsel review potential civil and criminal charges related to your conduct. Vincent's termination was swift and brutal. Within 90 minutes, security had escorted him through the lobby while employees watched in shocked silence. His company car was repossessed, his corporate credit cards cancelled, and his access to all Red Sea systems permanently revoked. But my revenge extended far beyond Vincent's termination. Within 48 hours, news of Vincent's firing for intellectual property theft spread throughout our industry like wildfire. Melissa, now promoted to operations coordinator as reward for her courage in exposing corporate misconduct, helped ensure the real story reached key industry publications and professional networks. Former Red Sea CEO terminated for systematic IP theft from senior executive became the headline across major business publications. The story detailed how Vincent had stolen strategic frameworks, misrepresented contributions to investors, and created legal liability through fraudulent client commitments. Industry analysts praised Red Sea's board for swift action in removing compromised leadership. Vincent's professional reputation was obliterated overnight with devastating precision. 3 executive positions he'd been negotiating at competitor firms were immediately withdrawn when potential employers learned about the intellectual property scandal. His scheduled keynote speech at the Industry Leadership Summit was cancelled, with organizers citing recent developments inconsistent with our conference values. His LinkedIn profile became a digital graveyard as connections distanced themselves and endorsements disappeared. Professional associations quietly removed Vincent from leadership committees. The Strategic Management Society revoked his membership. Executive search firms blacklisted him from consideration for senior positions. Within a week, Vincent went from celebrated industry leader to untouchable pariah whose name became synonymous with corporate dishonesty. Meanwhile, my professional vindication was complete and very public. Eleanor personally issued a company-wide statement acknowledging the board's failure to prevent Vincent's misconduct and praising my integrity in exposing the situation. The statement explicitly credited me as the originator of strategic frameworks that had driven Red Sea's success, correcting months of false attribution. Industry publications featured my story prominently, portraying me as a whistleblower who had protected corporate integrity at personal risk. Harvard Business Review requested an article about identifying and addressing executive intellectual property theft. The Strategic Management Institute invited me to speak about maintaining professional ethics in competitive environments. 3 weeks after Vincent's termination, Eleanor offered me the interim CEO position while the board conducted a formal search process. The offer included a substantial salary increase, expanded stock options, and assurance that I would be considered seriously for the permanent role. I accepted immediately. My first act as CEO was implementing a comprehensive intellectual property protection system with built-in attribution tracking and collaborative oversight protocols. No employee would ever again be able to steal credit for colleagues' work without immediate detection and documentation. Jake Sullivan, who had benefited directly from Vincent's favoritism and my stolen strategies, found himself in an extremely uncomfortable position. During my first executive team meeting as CEO, I addressed his situation directly. Jake, your recent promotion was based on strategic work that you didn't develop, I said calmly but firmly. While you may not have initiated the deception, you certainly benefited from it and failed to acknowledge the true source of your presented insights. Jake's face flushed with embarrassment as other executives watched his discomfort. I was following Vincent's instructions, he said weakly. I thought the collaboration was legitimate. Collaboration requires acknowledgement of original sources, I replied. Your presentations took explicit credit for frameworks you had no role in developing. That's not collaboration, that's complicity in intellectual property theft. I reassigned Jake to a market research analyst position appropriate to his actual experience level, with a corresponding salary adjustment. His stock options were revoked and his direct board access eliminated. Several other employees who had participated in marginalizing me during Vincent's regime found themselves transferred to less strategic roles with reduced responsibilities. The message was clear: Red Sea would operate on merit, integrity, and authentic contribution rather than manipulation and political maneuvering. The company's next quarterly results exceeded all previous records, built on the foundation of strategies I'd developed months earlier but never received proper credit for implementing. 3 months later, the board offered me the permanent CEO position. I accepted, becoming the youngest female CEO in Red Sea's 40-year history. Sitting in Vincent's former office, now mine, I often reflect on how quickly corporate fortunes can reverse. He thought he could erase me from Red Sea's strategic future, but his arrogance became his downfall. Every stolen idea, every excluded meeting, every dismissive comment had created a paper trail of his own destruction. Justice isn't always swift, but when it arrives, it's absolute. Sometimes people mistake kindness for weakness, patience for passivity. They assume that because you don't immediately retaliate, you're incapable of defending yourself. Vincent made that mistake. He confused my professionalism with powerlessness, my strategic thinking with submission. But the most dangerous opponents are those who plan carefully, gather evidence methodically, and strike with surgical precision when the moment is perfect. Today, Red Sea Enterprises thrives under authentic leadership built on transparency, collaboration, and genuine innovation. Vincent's name appears nowhere in our company history, his contributions erased as thoroughly as he tried to erase mine. The conference room where he once excluded me? That's where I now conduct weekly strategy sessions, surrounded by team members who earn their seats through merit rather than manipulation. If you've made it this far, you understand that workplace justice sometimes requires patience, preparation, and the courage to fight back when fighting back matters most. Like this story, if workplace revenge resonates with you, comment below with your own experiences of professional vindication, and subscribe for more stories about turning corporate tables on those who underestimate the power of strategic thinking.